Welcome, listeners. I'm Miriam Merrill, Chair of Physical Education Department and the Director of Pomona-Pitzer Athletics. As you know, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which is the landmark education amendment of 1972 that prohibits sex discrimination in any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Pomona-Pitzer is highlighting our own implementation of Title IX with a series of events and programs, including a multi-part docuseries of conversations with various students, alumni, and coaches who played an integral role in the Title IX here on campus. I'm joined today by Alma Zook, Pomona class of 1972. Alma played volleyball and track and field all 4 years while at Pomona. She was inducted into the Athletic Hall of Fame here in 1983. Welcome, Alma.
Hi.
As noted in the speech given by Professor Emeritus Ed Malin at the 1983 Hall of Fame induction, Alma had no fear of failure, no fear of hard work, and no doubt that she would reach her goal. She was often encouraged by certain faculty members who helped pace her, but more often by herself. Alma, in her senior year, placed second in the mile run at the UCLA Invitational Meet. Similarly, she developed and perfected her abilities in volleyball until she was able to earn a good amount of playing time and serve as a team captain. After graduating from Pomona and serving on faculty at a small college in New York, Alma returned to Pomona in 1982 as a professor of physics. Today, Alma's primary field of research deals with blazars, essentially a very active subgroup of quasars. Well, excited to hear more about that. Alma was also notable for her special achievements. Years ago, she wrote the first computer program for handling the statistics of the women's basketball team. She was known to challenge others to use their talents and become involved in the emerging women's athletic program, and she championed sports skills at a very crucial time for women's sports. She has also played in and captained the pep band that for many years sustained and supported the football team. Alma, we are happy to have you here, and we are so excited to speak with you.
I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's get into our questions.
Okay.
So let's talk about when you were younger, right? So growing up, did you have any female athletic role models? And if so, tell us a little bit about them.
Okay. Probably not in the sense that you might be thinking of, but my mom, when she was growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, played, I'm not sure if this was baseball or softball, but she played on the boys' team because there weren't that many girls. And she was very proud of the fact that they would let her play on their team. Every so often she would show us, I think it was her left ring finger, which is a little bit crooked, because which she attributed to fielding hard line drives. So, and she didn't make a big deal about this, but she walked lots of places. She kind of refused to get a driver's license, which was sort of unheard of in Southern California in the 50s and 60s. And so if she was going someplace local, she would just walk. And so that kind of set a good example for not just hopping in the car anytime you needed to go half a mile.
That's great. Yeah, I have a very similar story about my mother being very much into sports and athletics. Mm-hmm. And to be very honest, she can talk more about the NBA and baseball than I can.
Wow.
So that certainly I have a similar experience. So prior to coming to Pomona in 1968, what were your experiences in sports and more generally physical activity?
Yeah. Girls' sports when I was growing up was not something that happened in California public schools, at least not the ones I attended. I know I had a sixth grade teacher, Mr. Mulligan, who really kind of wanted everybody to be fit. And so he was, I think, more intentional about seeing to it that girls went out and did things as well as the boys. But I think the first time I really encountered people who were really involved in girls' sports and physical fitness in general was when I went to high school, where we had PE. And I kind of went into PE with this attitude, smart kids don't do sports, But over the 4 years, one of the things I learned was that if you were willing to try, then that it was okay with the PE teachers if you weren't necessarily very good at things, as long as you were willing to try them. And I remember we had these physical fitness tests, I guess you'd call them, where, is how many push-ups can you do, how many sit-ups can you do in a minute, how fast can you run 600 yards. And it turned out I could do those things. And so that made me think, maybe there's more to this athletics thing than just playing sports. And so I was wandering into this mindset of staying physically fit, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about the willingness to try. And I think that is the beauty of physical education, because you start so young and you try so many things. Bowling. And I remember we square danced in physical education. Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite things to do. So thank you, Mr. Mulligan, for for introducing us to physical education. So let's talk about your experience here at Pomona. So you did both track and volleyball. And how did you get involved in those sports?
Yeah, I actually didn't do volleyball my first year. But I did. I think I mentioned earlier that I did take self-defense judo. We had to take 8 semesters of PE when I was a student here, and I'm thinking that was not such a bad idea. I should come back and say a little bit about my reaction to that as a faculty member, so I took self-defense judo, and I've never had to use it on a human being, but a couple of times I'm pretty sure I've saved myself from at least a broken wrist by knowing how to fall. So I was very glad, especially the time my bicycle stopped very suddenly and I kept on going. So I was very glad I'd taken self-defense judo then. But in the spring, a good friend of mine, another Pomona student named Regina Hansen, was interested in doing some running, and in a sort of more organized way than just, whenever I think about it. And she talked to Nancy Breitenstein, who was trying to form a women's track team. And I think Jo Grover in the class ahead of mine was instrumental in that, because she was very active in women's track until she graduated, of course. And so I thought, well, that might be kind of fun, and that would take care of my PE requirement for this semester. So went along with Gina. And at some point you have to decide what events you're going to run. And I knew from high school that I was not a sprinter. But I was pretty sure that if I decided to do the mile, I could probably run a mile. And there's a family story about that. My dad was an undergraduate at the University of Wisconsin, and he belonged to a fraternity. And for some reason, all the frats were having a sort of sports day or something like that, and you could get glory for your frat if you entered. And my dad didn't think of himself as a runner, but he was pretty sure that he could finish a mile. So he signed up, and he finished the mile and got glory for his frat. And he liked to tell that story occasionally. And I thought, well, yeah, I bet I can finish a mile. And so that's how I became a distance, what would now be considered a short, long-distance runner.
Sure, that's awesome. So I want to revisit this 8 semesters of PE because, our students now only have to take 2.
Right.
So
that's an improvement over 1, which it used to be.
Sure.
Yeah.
So tell me about your experience with that.
Well, especially as I, got more involved in college, I thought, this is good to have an excuse to go out and get some exercise every semester. And so when I'm advising students, I make sure they satisfy their PE requirement right away, and I encourage them to take more PE. And I think it's a tribute to our athletic program that they offer this huge array of PE courses so that you really have to work at it not to find a course that you will enjoy.
Absolutely. And I think, there's research out there that suggests the connection between physical activity and mental wellness and the pressures of what students are feeling in the classroom.
Right. Absolutely.
It's just something that I don't think physical education should ever go away, particularly on campuses like ours.
Yeah, I would not be unhappy to have us go back to at least 4 semesters of required PE, at least 1 a year.
I agree. Do you hear that, students? Oh, all right. So talk to us about what stands out to you most about your experiences as a Pomona-Pitzer student athlete.
Yeah. Boy, it's because it all kind of runs together. But I guess the thing that I really remember is how big that track looks when you have to run around it 4 times. And I was reminded of this recently because the physics majors got together and did a fun run of their own. And I was really surprised at how many of our women majors are on either the track team or the cross-country team. So I was the lead-off person, I think, because they think, oh, she'll probably be kind of slow, and let's get her out of the way beforehand. So I did my 100 yards, or it's a metric track, must be 100 meters, to get things going. And I thought, well, I mean, this is just barely warmed up as far as I'm concerned. So I did a mile, but I remember getting out on the track saying, this track is really big, and it feels really slow when I'm running on it.
Yes, and for someone who was a thrower, the track still is very big.
Yeah, that's right.
Just give me a circle. Just give me a small 8-foot circle. Awesome. So I want to hear about Renwick Gym because, there are so many stories about this particular gym. So for those of you who don't know, it was built in 1918 and it was originally intended as barracks for training student soldiers during World War I. And then later it was designated as the women's gym for physical education. So what was your experience or what memories do you have of Renwick Gym?
Yeah. Well, Renwick was famous especially for bees and also woodpeckers. And the woodpeckers would, because Renwick was all wood, and if built in 1918, that wood lumber was getting kind of old. And so it was easy for woodpeckers to peck holes in it and store acorns in there. And every so often you would come into Renwick for, volleyball practice or something, and there would be acorns on the floor because they'd worked their way through. And I remember at least one volleyball game where we had to call a timeout because there was a bee on the floor. And you don't want to step on a bee. So there was this timeout while we escorted the bees to the outside, and then we could get the game going again. But we kind of knew even then that Renwick Gym was perhaps not the optimal space for women's indoor sports like volleyball, and whereas the men's had Memorial Gym, which is a proper gym. I mean, Renwick had a proper gymnasium floor, and here's something you might not know. Renwick was famous for having good acoustics, and apparently the Los Angeles Philharmonic would record in Renwick Gym. Wow. I think this was probably in the 30s or something like that. They certainly weren't doing it by the time I was a student at Pomona. But it sounds like that's a little piece of Renwick lore that you need to know about.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's very interesting. So you talked about, of course, Renwick Gym not being the best space to play. So let's talk a little bit about support. So when you were a student at Pomona, did you feel like you were supported as a female athlete? And were there specific people in the department who were especially impactful to your life?
Well, I think the person who was most impactful was Nancy Breitenstein, who coached both women's track and women's volleyball. She herself was actually a specialist in basketball. And so when I came back to join the faculty, she had pretty much was now specializing in basketball. And the women's program was advanced enough that now you essentially had specialists in the sport coaching that sport. So that was a change right there. But Nancy was really patient with me and really encouraged me, and I liked being called Tiger. And so she was probably the main influence. But generally, I didn't get into long conversations with especially any of the men's sports coaches, but I always had the impression that they thought that this was pretty cool, that I was doing men's sports, even though I was not terribly good at it.
That's great. So I heard you mention Tiger. So is there a story behind?
No, she just called me that.
Nice. That must have been tenacious.
Yeah.
All right. So you were a senior when Title IX was enacted in 1972. What did you know about Title IX and what its passage would mean for women's opportunities in athletics?
I have to admit that I have no memories of Title IX happening until much later. I don't really remember.
Yeah.
It should have been a big deal, and maybe it didn't seem like such a big deal because Pomona was moving in that direction anyway. It's not like Pomona was suddenly being forced to start up a lot of women's sports.
Yeah, I find that to be the experience of many women who were playing sports during that time. Is it just kind of was. We continued to play, right? But it wasn't this really kind of intentional thought of Title IX, therefore we play.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Was there anyone, any coaches or professors involved in the Title IX movement that you can remember?
I don't know because I was kind of oblivious to that. So
Of course. So after leaving the gates of Pomona and before returning to Pomona in 1982, you served on faculty at Hamilton College. And for those who do not know, I was the associate athletic director at Hamilton College prior to coming here. So I'm so excited to share that connection. What sort of athletic opportunities back then did women have at Hamilton? And I'm sure you can talk because it was Kirkland College and Hamilton College. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Right. Hamilton was in an interesting situation because when I got there on the faculty, they had just gone co-ed. And they had gone co-ed by absorbing the women's college, Kirkland, which was right across the street from them. And that was kind of an uneasy process for everybody. There were some odd ways of handling Kirkland faculty and to what extent they were just automatically absorbed by Hamilton and so on. Lots of my memories of Hamilton are colored by that merger. But that meant that Hamilton, unlike Pomona, suddenly had to put together a lot of women's sports teams so that there would be roughly the same amount of money spent per student, regardless of whether the student was male or female. And I think that that football and hockey were kind of both exempt from this. They're both very expensive sports because of the amount of protective gear you need. Hamilton took hockey pretty seriously. Lots of those Northeastern schools do. And football, of course, is pretty major every place that has a football team at all. So Hamilton, keep on saying Hamilton when I want to say hockey. So hockey and football were in a separate category that had big budgets, and then you had a lot of sports that were less expensive to run. So Hamilton was really kind of trying to play catch up because I don't know that Kirkland had intercollegiate sports at all. I know they had PE people because lots of their PE people joined the Hamilton faculty, but I just don't know what the story was on intercollegiate sports. So Hamilton was trying to put together a lot of women's teams pretty quickly. The only one I really remember was the women's hockey team, because hockey is a big sport in upstate New York. And I think you would have lots of women who might have played hockey in high school and so came with some experience. But I think by second or third year on the faculty, I was put on the athletic committee. And the chair of the athletic committee was the basketball coach who had a very successful basketball program. And it was pretty clear that he thought this whole women's sports thing was a fad that would go away. And, of course, it didn't. But, he was kind of paying lip service to funding women's athletics, but it was pretty clear that they were kind of an afterthought, and the serious money really needed to go to men's sports because that's really what mattered.
Yeah, and I'm glad to say the athletic director that I served under, John Hind, is the total opposite, right?
Good.
He totally gets it and, makes sure that the experiences and the funds that are going to the men's program are equivalent on the women's
Right.
side.
I've spoken to other people who've taught at Hamilton various times, and it's clear that Hamilton is very different from the way it was when I was there.
Sure. And I can imagine that's because you were there when the change happened, right? There's always that transition period where people are a little bit more resistant than they really should be, but...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you have this sort of naive idea that it was pretty clear to me from talking to some of the senior members of the faculty there, although not my department chair, who was great, that there were some of them who really thought that college was wasted on women. And it's pretty clear that is not the attitude there anymore.
No, not at all. Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. So let's bring in a little bit of physics. So within sports and physics academia, some experience a culture that praises male participants more highly than female participants. Did you find yourself navigating this sort of culture as it relates to physics? And what did you learn from your experiences?
Okay. Okay. You kind of derailed me by putting physics in that.
Sorry.
So, but yeah, I was more thinking about sports.
Yeah, sure.
Since I wasn't what you might call an elite athlete, I mean, it was clear I was not going to go to the Olympics. I was not going to turn professional. That I suspect that the kind of counter you describe would be more likely to happen to some woman who really was looking at the Olympics or really was hoping that there would be professional women's basketball eventually. So I can't really say I have had any experience with that.
Sure. Okay. And you've supported Pomona-Pitzer Athletics for over 40 years now, so thank you.
Happy to do it.
For many years, you played in the band at Sage-Hand football games. In your eyes, how have women's sports changed since you were a Pomona-Pitzer student athlete? And to what extent has there been progress towards equity?
I would have to say that there has been huge progress. It's my impression that with the exception of football, if there's a sports team, if there's a men's team in a given sport, there's a women's team in that sport as well. And that right there is, I would call that evidence of progress. I'm always pleased at the number of our majors. Physics majors are not usually thought of as necessarily being athletic, but we have lots of physics majors who are serious athletes. Derek Watanabe, I think he's something like class of 85 or 86. He was the first Pomona physics major I was really aware of who was quite serious. He was on the football team. It seemed like half of the men's cross-country team and all of the women's cross-country team are physics majors. And I'm sure other majors are allowed to go out for sports as well. But just the fact that an academic major that's sort of famous for being geeky and klutzy is so active in the intercollegiate program is really gratifying to me.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear you kind of talk about that from, someone who has kind of moved through Title IX and then kind of seen it through its evolution, but being someone who Title IX just was and women just did sports, like there was no thought to kind of what comes before, which is why I think it's really important for us to really highlight Title IX, particularly for our current student athletes who just take participation for granted.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And, particularly at a Division III institution, we know that college athletics is only a small portion of our lives. How did you use the lessons learned from your time as a student athlete at Pomona-Pitzer, to better apply yourself to both the workforce and in life in the future?
Right, yeah. Well, I think, one key thing is just the idea of routinely getting exercise, and that benefits anybody who does it. So I still run for exercise, not as fast as when I was an undergraduate by any means, but I do exercise regularly. I live within walking distance of work, so I walk to work, and so I think staying physically active has, in ways that I'm not necessarily completely conscious of, has just kind of kept me sane, especially during the pandemic. I wonder what all those folks who live in places where it snows in the winter did, because it was so great knowing that chances are, if I'm tired of being in my house, I can just go outside and walk for a couple of miles and just leave the pandemic behind. And so that was, so I'm grateful for having developed that set of habits. Being a distance runner kind of fits into that sometimes you just have to stay at it. And if you stay at it, good things will happen. And so that concept of just keeping going is I think, really helpful in the workplace and in life.
Yeah, you talk about just how, the connection to athletics and sports and moving helped you in the pandemic. I absolutely feel the same. Yeah, when I moved here in the middle of the pandemic, knew no one, right? And it was just in my room for work, and it was pickleball that I was able to play and see people. But, if I was in upstate New York, I wouldn't have access to go play pickleball because it's going to be cold outside. Yeah. So, yeah, that's great. So, I want to pick your brain about the float serve that you developed as a volleyball player.
Right.
And hopefully all of our volleyball players who are listening can take notes on this. Tell us about the float serve. And as a physics professor, use whatever physics lingo you need to help us.
All right. Yeah. So the floater, this is analogous to the knuckleball in baseball. Normally, when you throw any ball, and I'm especially conscious of this when I look at people who throw footballs, that you want to put spin on it. Because the spin stabilizes the motion of the ball. And the physics lingo you want here is conservation of angular momentum.
Yes.
I think everybody has a good intuitive feel for what we usually call momentum. Strictly speaking, this is linear momentum or translational momentum. And that's the tendency that if you have an object that's moving, it tends to keep moving at the same speed in the same direction unless you exert a force on it from the outside. That's Newton's first and second laws of motion. There's something analogous with rotation that just as you have to work at it to change the momentum, the trajectory of a moving object, you also have to exert what's called a torque, which is the rotational analog of a force, to change the orientation of the spin axis of a rotating object. And so normally when you're throwing balls, you want to take advantage of that conservation of angular momentum so that the trajectory of the ball is predictable. And you can see where this would especially be an asset when you're throwing a football that you hope somebody else will catch. But in some circumstances where you're propelling a ball of some sort that somebody else is supposed to do something with that's more complicated than just catching it, like hitting a baseball or fielding a volleyball, it's true that if you have a really hard, fast serve, that's very useful. But what I was able to do, and I certainly did not invent the floater, and I was kind of surprised when Nancy said, "Oh, you've got this nice floater serve." And, oh, good. I wasn't doing that on purpose. But what you do with the floater serve, and it's the same deal with the knuckleball, that you deliberately don't put spin on the ball. And since it's not spinning, you don't have angular momentum that you need to keep going in the same direction or exert a large torque on to change. And that makes the ball much more susceptible to random air currents and stuff like that. And that makes it more difficult to field. So that's how the floater works, and that's how the knuckleball. It's the same, and the knuckleball works the same way in baseball.
Nice, listeners. I hope you got that because I got that. That was wonderful. So this has been a really great interview, and I've learned so much. In closing, is there anything else you would like to share with our current student athletes, or something you would want them to know?
Sure, and it's especially stay active, even if you can't continue to play your sport. Stay active. Something that's kind of important to me. I don't make a big, don't do a lot of publicity about this, but about 25 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Fortunately, stage 1, caught it very early. But one of the things that kept me going through the chemotherapy especially, which is not comfortable, is I was able to stay active not at the level, the pre-chemo level, but I was able to stay active, and I think that gave me sort of a sense of, I really can make it through this. And of course, there are statistics that indicate that people who are physically active are less likely to develop cancer in the first place, and that surgery and the treatment is more likely to be successful. But I can tell you from my own experience that really does seem to work. And so there really is a If you're looking for an excuse to stay active, that's it.
That's great. Great words of advice. So thank you very much, Alma, for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
We are grateful for your time and grateful to you for promoting women's athletics here in Sage Hen Athletics. So thank you.
Okay, thanks again.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in today. Please look for our other programs and events celebrating Pomona-Pitzer's 50 years of Title IX. We'll see you soon.